Welcome to the FutureWerx podcast, where we focus on turning vision to reality by exploring the frontier technologies emerging from global laboratories that will define future conflicts. I'm Scott McJunkin, your host, and today we're joined by Carl Priechenfried. He's the Executive Director of FutureWerx. And as a retired Marine intelligence officer with 27 years of service and a passion for futurism, Carl is leading FutureWerx's mission to uncover and understand the cutting-edge innovations that will shape the battle spaces of tomorrow. And together, we're going to explore how these advancements are poised to transform the nature of warfare and global security. Carl, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So let's go ahead and talk about FutureWerx. What is it? What are you trying to accomplish? And what can people expect?
Okay, Scott, great question, and thanks for the chance to speak on this. You touched on it with your opening comments, but FutureWerx attempts to explore, and I would say imagine, the future of conflict through the lens of emerging and frontier technologies, trends, and capabilities. Concepts that are emerging. I like to frame it by saying that we pay less attention to what's coming off the battlefield in Ukraine. Not that that's not important. It absolutely is. And lots of folks are looking at it. But we pay more attention to what's coming out of the laboratories of MIT, Stanford, and elsewhere. Edge technologies, not necessarily designed with defense implications in mind. But our job is to do tech scouting, kind of see what's coming, at the edge and imagine potential defense applications so that we can anticipate adversary utilization of those capabilities and perhaps imagine our own utilization of capabilities with defense perspective.
So you're looking at things that are being designed to develop now, kind of extrapolating that, projecting into the future, what those could look like, and also almost reverse engineering it, thinking about how, threats, the bad guys can use that technology against the United States.
Yeah, that's right. I call it tech scouting, looking at, what is published overnight in terms of laboratory results, current publications. I'd like to give an example, right? MIT published several months ago a report about their development of microbots that are water skimming, have a water skimming capability like a water bug, and that derive their fuel from the bacteria in seawater.
So they're powered not by anything other than what's surrounding them at all times.
That's correct. And so when you think about that, that bacteria could be considered a functionally a limitless capability. If the bacteria is present in seawater, but these are microbots, very low power devices that are water skimming. What would potential defense applications of those be? What if that same capability, which is not what MIT is trying to design, but what if, not that I know of anyway, that capability was coupled with a very low power emissions of electromagnetic energy? And what if we could then, from a defense perspective, weaponize that in the form of 10 million of these, or X number, a very large order number, released remotely into denied spaces that we don't get manned craft to in a time of war or conflict. What could that do? What could that do for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance sensing networks? Sensors. What could that do for perhaps a mesh communications network over places that are otherwise denied spaces from RF energy? What about electronic warfare applications? Right. These are just interesting things to imagine, kind of up to the edge of science fiction, but as an avid science fiction reader myself, I certainly recognize that science fiction becomes science fact very, very fast. You look at Dune, Frank Herbert writing about 1,000 generation breeding programs to create a superhuman, right? Again, my science fiction nerd is coming out. But today we have CRISPR technologies that can affect the DNA of living organisms today. Right? That was unheard of technologies, but they have been imagined to have those kinds of technologies through science fiction literature previously. So I think it's, when I talk about thinking up to the edge of science fiction, because science fiction becomes science fact, I think it's fair game.
Is that where we are today in culture, and also whenever we we think about threats in the future and conflicts, that we actually are thinking in terms of science fiction now? Things are progressing that fast.
I think so. And I think we owe it to ourselves to think that far forward. We had the AI panel last night here at FutureWerx, and one of our guest speakers commented on the fact that technologies that are taken for granted today were 10 years ago were science fiction. Things like, edge object recognition that's happening through, algorithmic approaches towards, looking at images, like satellite images and whatnot. That 10 years ago was a science fiction capability that's routine now. In fact, it's so routine, we can do that on our iPhones. We can look at and have our iPhone photo library search for pictures of our family members because it recognizes previous pictures of our family members. It's just a capability on our phones now. That was science fiction 10 or 15 years ago.
So you have talked about, just in this intro, we've talked about artificial intelligence and also microbots and genetics and CRISPR. There's such a wide breadth of topics that I feel like you are neck deep in, and you're looking all around. So what do you look at specifically, and what has captured your attention the most? What concerns you the most? Or I guess what has the most potential of being used by bad guys as capabilities against us in the future?
I'm going to give you a circuitous answer, and maybe I'll end up with an answer. If not, you'll come back to me. But it's certainly a creative space. It's a fun, but yet serious space to imagine all of the technologies and which ones could impact us or not. I think when I get to your question about what area do I pay attention to the most, it's probably energy and energy production. When I think about what enables military and defense power projection and power sustainment, and what constrains it the most, it's energy. Fuels for vehicles, it's and aircraft and ships. I think that fuel consumption and bulk consumption, because fuel is a bulky thing, I think that's one of the biggest limiting factors, the logistics of energy supply. And so I pay a lot of attention to kind of battery technologies. I pay attention to renewable technologies. Very recently, within the last few weeks, several reports have been published about leveraging some elements that are a result of radioactive decay, specifically americium. I don't know if I'm saying that one right. Probably need to check my pronunciation, but it's taking this radioactive decay element that emits. It actually glows, right? So it glows. It glows green, and it's been placed into a crystal lattice structure and coupled with a photovoltaic receptor that then generates energy in a battery that could last potentially hundreds of years, because it's just radioactive decay. And we know what that rate of radioactive decay is. We know how long that element will glow. And you couple it with a light receptor that's receiving that glow and transmitting that into, or transforming that into energy, very low power energy. But the applications for these in terms of batteries that never need to be replaced in your lifetime, right? That's fascinating to me. What could that do for low watt sensors, low power sensors that can be coupled, and with low watt emissions, but built-in mesh networks and things that allow those capabilities to propagate, much further than a single sensor can do. The energy technology to me is fascinating, and I think we're really on the cusp of some real battery breakthroughs. The use of sodium instead of lithium for renewable batteries, rechargeable batteries, to go to a very common element versus a very rare element to source lithium. With solid state versus some of the existing batteries now, they haven't been efficient previously enough to really be cost effective, but I think we're very close to that. So there's a lot of things going on in the battery and the energy production space.
I like how you brought up energy as being one of the biggest things about the future, because a lot of conversation is happening around, of course, AI, which is what FutureWerx had the panel on and the speakers last night. But and then also the conversation usually goes to the fan favorite topics like drones, and you mentioned mesh networks, which is a huge deal. Great. But all of that cannot really exist or continue without proper energy supply happening. And another one is water. Another one.
That's kind of my number two. If I went down to the list, number two would be
you got to power the machines, but also you got to power the soldiers, right? So water is a huge logistical issue. What's your feeling about that?
Again, look back over the recently published literature. There's been published within the last month or so a report talking about the ability to crack H2O into subcomponent parts to create fuels for hydrogen, fuel. And the reverse technologies to create H2O for capabilities that we could place, on Mars or on the moon. It turns out there's actually a fair amount of water on the moon.
There's water on the moon.
There's water on the moon. It's in the dust. But extracting that water in ways that are technologically feasible and efficient in terms of producing enough to sustain those, we're making breakthroughs on that right now.
Well, my mind is still stuck on there's water on the moon. Yeah, I'm going to be Googling that after our conversation and learning more about that. That's fascinating to me. But I can see how you are applying, like what you said, the futurism perspective on all of these advancements. And we have to consider how each one of those impacts the current conflicts, but also what that's going to mean in the future. If you could sum up or give us a picture of what a modern battle space looks like and what we could expect to see or hear on the news, what that looks like, how would you describe it in a simplistic term?
Yeah, modern. I guess it depends on your frame of reference. I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. The phrase is becoming increasingly popular now that first contact is for robots. And I think that's absolutely the case. There's a lot of concern about artificial intelligence and application to autonomous systems. The realities are we have autonomous systems today that have, capabilities to do things automatically without, quote unquote, a man in the loop. Some of the descriptions about man in the loop of decision making versus man on the loop versus man off of the loop of that decision-making cycle. All of those happen today with autonomous systems that are given certain parameters to make certain actions if conditions are met, right? So that already exists today. Anyone that has concerns about these autonomous systems just needs to look at where that already exists and how do we bound the parameters of that autonomous system's ability to act. But I think as we look to the future, I think we're going to see systems that increasingly have complex, parameter mechanisms by which they can make decision making. Are we going to end up basic examples? Okay, I see an adversary's tank in the open. Yes, our system that's flying overhead can detect that and attack it. It knows that its effects radius is limited, and there's nothing within that radius that it sees, like a small child or civilian or other non-targetable criteria by how we determine what is a lawfully targetable criteria or not. Yes, it can strike it now. What happens, as we look to the future when we have swarms of systems flying overhead that can loiter and perhaps last for weeks, and they have an ability to look at a broad swath of area and conduct autonomous targeting against that type of parameter. But now we're not talking about one single tank in one single location. We're talking about, kilometers of battle space that is constantly assessing the environment and determining what is a legitimate target, what's prioritized as a target, and then what do you strike? I think that's the future.
The future is, to sum up what you said, AI is going to advance more. It's going to, and also the energy supply, of course. You mentioned the loitering. And it's going to make more and more autonomous decisions. And those decisions are pretty much going to be based on historical data that's been given to it. Like in this scenario A, we have made these decisions, and we want you to act thusly. But even before that, you mentioned that there's going to be parameters that we have to have with the man in the loop thing. If we set those parameters today, that's fine. But it really does depend upon keeping those parameters set generations from now. As more and newer generations of people come in, they're going to have to establish for themselves too how far they want AI to go. And I believe, how much do you think human nature is going to get in the way of that? We have our ethics, but also the ethics of on the other side, the people we're competing against.
That's right. You asked that question in terms of human nature. I really think we're talking about kind of societal norms for morals and ethics. Mm-hmm. And the question on the panel yesterday was, does our adherence to rule of law perhaps disadvantage us against an adversary who doesn't have those same boundaries? Mm-hmm. But this is not the first time that question has been explored. That's been explored countless times for well over 100 years in our society, about preserving the moral high ground, the rule of law, because you have to plan for the peace that follows, and you have to hold to your societal values. And so I don't believe we're disadvantaged by holding to that. Let me go back, though. You talked about how do we set kind of the bounds for autonomous systems. Mm-hmm. I really think that if you're really thinking about the future of warfare, what we're talking about is not ground combat or air combat or combat in the multiple domains. I mean, there will be conflict in space, right? It's going to happen, whether it's cislunar or, kind of outer space beyond the moon. Positioning for key terrain in space is a very real thing. Studying Lagrange points. What are Lagrange points and why do those offer key terrain in space, right? Getting again back to my geekiness on science fiction kind of narratives here, but Lagrange points of stability between two body systems that are orbiting and their competing gravitational fields. That's where we position satellites today because it requires less fuel to hold position in those 5 Lagrange points. Four of the 5 that we use, the 5th is on the other side of the sun, so not as advantageous. But to the future of conflict, we're talking about algorithmic war. How do we understand, right? The system is programmed with certain boundaries. Whoever understands those boundaries understands how to defeat them. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about coding war, algorithm war. How does my algorithm outcompete yours? Back to science fiction. A guy named Alastair Reynolds wrote this. He's a British physicist. Wrote a 4-book series, and in one of them, a spaceship is trying to penetrate an alien object that has significant amount of defenses on it. And the outer layer of the crust, in fact, it's this capability in space that they built an entire kind of mini planet shell, kind of think of moon. This moon around this capability at the center, with defenses on every level, and they're trying to permeate all the different types of alien defenses. The very first one are autonomous systems. And so this spaceship, physically drives into the surface of the moon and then starts getting attacked by this autonomous systems. And it has to program itself to stay one generation ahead of the alien autonomous capabilities learning curve. And by doing so, they said, well, we can program this. We see how fast they learn. We can stay in front of that for 48 and a half hours. We know when we hit our technological level, and this alien adversary that continues to learn will exceed us. So we have a window of opportunity for 48 hours to penetrate this level of defense. That's algorithmic war. That's, understanding how autonomous systems work and how do you out-program, out-code that other algorithm. I mean, that's the real future of conflict with these autonomous systems is algorithmic war.
Do you think the United States is leading that war, that effort?
No. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Some of our speakers last night talked about how in this space, industry is leading the U.S. Department of Defense, because ultimately the monies that are being placed against these, the titans of industry have far more resources to put against development of these capabilities than the Department of Defense. Yes, we have an $800 something billion defense budget, but the titans of industry have more. And that's what it takes. Our concerns at a country like China that is, placing mass effort on development of this in an autocratic system that has more direct control over resources and over state-run economies to place resourcing against that. I think we're being out-resourced.
That goes back to the value system thing that you brought up. Is the value system that we have set up leveraging or weakening us, putting us at a disadvantage? Mm-hmm. And you mentioned China is not really limited by certain things that we are, and you think that they're taking advantage of that?
I think they have natural advantages. Again, a speaker last night pointed out the fact that China, as a surveillance state, is going to develop state surveillance tools in ways that we just won't as a country that respects and prioritizes individual freedom from surveillance. And so there are going to be areas in which different societies with different value systems are going to have a comparative advantage against us. The speaker's point last night was we should then focus on those areas in which we are going to have competitive advantage rather than trying to do it all, knowing that there are some places that we're just disadvantaged by our moral system, by our resourcing. Let's not focus on those areas, focus on the areas where we know we're going to have advantage.
So there's a huge ethical consideration with all of this that has to be injected into all the conversations that we're having. You brought up a really good point. And I think in terms of warfare and just the global competition, we have to win, right? You can't lose. And so could there be a point where those value systems are challenged and maybe you're like, okay, well, we have to win this. Mm-hmm. And we can't lose. We can't be taken over.
You're really talking about existential existence when there's existential threat, right? What does your value system change? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a wide range of answers on that. Academic literature has certainly explored that. Ethicists explore kind of those concepts over time. And I think there's plenty of historical examples to look at when societies were threatened with their existence. Did they change to try and compete? Did they change to try and survive? Because we're not really talking about competing anymore. We're talking about survival. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a fundamental question that's going to be asked when we reach there. I don't feel like I have a deep enough kind of academic background to explore all that to speak kind of cogently on where the state of that assessment is. But I do recognize that existential, survivalism is a game changer for value systems, or potentially could be.
If you were given the opportunity to advise the entirety of DoD in the defense industry,
no pressure here.
Right, no pressure at all. What would you say would be? What would be your advice as far as when you're considering the future and how you prepare today for what you can kind of see in the future, what we're going to experience?
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. I think as the character of war changes, we have to have systems that are prepared to change just as rapidly, if not more so. And unfortunately, that's not our design of our I think more the military industrial complex and the apparatus that the Department of Defense and the government does acquisitions. A lot of it's codified in law. And so some of it the DoD can change, some of it the DoD can't change. It's written in law that you approach acquisitions in certain ways. I took a class years ago, focused on future war and innovation. And that was the name of the class, well over a decade now. And in this elective class, what we determined was that innovation in war depended upon flexibility, being a learning organization and designing yourself to learn. And that's important. You don't learn by happenstance, not systemically. You have to be designed to learn. And so having a learning organization, an organization that is prepared to change. You think about it, we've built conventional military capabilities, well through the Cold War and the post-Cold War period. So our capabilities are really well known. So of course, adversaries seeking to contest us are going to find ways to defeat our capabilities, both symmetrically and asymmetrically. We build power projection platforms. China builds missile systems, long-range missile systems that are designed to target our long-range power projection platforms like carriers and other force projection things. Missile systems that are designed to target first and second island chains, thousands of miles beyond the boundary of China itself to project an anti-access area denial capability. So we have to be prepared to be flexible and prepared to change. And my concern is that our system built up over a really long time has lots of barnacles. a naval man as a Marine, so using nautical terms here, we build these systems, but they quickly get barnacles built on them. Oh, that's how we've been doing it, and we've built all these structures to do that. So our ability to change and innovate in the face of crisis, in the face of conflict. That my concern is that we're not built to be flexible. We're not built to change. I've seen it in my personal career when we've tried to enact change. I mean, there's certainly an emotional component of change, which is always, I think, a barrier to sometimes the logic. The logic can be clear, but there can still be emotions that have to be accounted for in that change process. There's a reason that, that folks study. There are change management offices. There are change management certifications to think about how to prepare, to innovate, to adapt, and to adjust in the faces of things that are going to present real challenges for us.
The topic of collaboration within the DoD and also in the DoD's relationship with external, private sector companies, contractors. That was a big topic, and how do you exchange the ideas? And not only does the DoD and the defense industry have to adapt, but also industry has to adapt, and also there has to be a concerted effort on both parts. Like that was something that I took away from the event, and which would lead to drastic change that would help us in many numerous ways. Getting off the dark topic of future war and conflict, what are you most excited about? When it comes to the future, you're out there looking at all these technologies and all these innovations. What do you see as like a positive that we'll benefit from?
Yeah, thank you for lightening the mood up here a little bit. FutureWerx imagines the future of conflict, but because I'm looking at edge technologies, I'm excited about problems that can be solved through technologies. Solar still hasn't come into its own, but solar power, the efficiencies of those panels are hovering around 28 or so %, right? So really a ton of energy is not being reclaimed through the solar process. I think, again, the world's energy problems, which underlie, I think, humanity's central problem is that I'm concerned about the impacts on the climate by the way we generate energy, and we have been generating energy for the last several hundred years. I'm hopeful that we're going to find methods to change that. I'm concerned about the impact and the toll on the environment that just generating new ways to make energy today won't solve some of the scars that have occurred, but I'm hopeful that we're on the cusp of discovering those technologies which will create a better future for tomorrow. And so I think that technology is a tool like anything else. It can be used for good. It can be used for harm. We look at it in terms of defense, but because I'm reading a lot of science literature these days, I also think about all the impacts for good. How can we solve future problems? AI using artificial intelligence tools to discover new proteins in ways that man probably would not ever get to, except by luck, as a speaker pointed out. But we have artificial intelligence mechanisms that are helping us discover, new proteins and potentially new medicines and things that can solve some problems that have plagued humanity, forever. So I'm hopeful that technologies are going to allow us to solve some of the current problems that we have that plague not just our society, but all societies on the globe. I'm excited about the potential to see man escape the bounds of a single planet. And I think that I can envision a future in which we populate multiple planets.
I think the issues that you brought up as far as energy is concerned, and also advancements in proteins, which leads into medicine and overall wellness. These are core concepts that actually lead to that if we solve them, energy, food, genetics, all of that, if they can be improved, that actually kind of reduces the propensity for conflict to happen. Like we actually reduce, a lot of the things, like we're not trying to get resources from other people and stuff, and everybody improves. So, I like that perspective of the future. I like that outlook. Let's say someone listened to what you had to say today, and they ask themselves,
"Are we sure someone's going to listen to this guy?"
Oh yeah, I know. Okay. Like there's dozens and dozens out there that that are listening and watching. But let's say someone's out there and they're watching and they're like, you know what, this is a topic that I really want to discover. I really want to get into and I want to get more involved. And of course, they could always go to futurewerx.com, read our articles, join our community. But for themselves, they want to educate themselves. They want to dip their toe into it. What would you say would be a good first step to start thinking like a futurist and start thinking about what's happening now and how it's going to impact the future and trying to come up with solutions along the way?
Yeah.
What would be your advice?
Oh gosh, there's probably a couple of different directions you could go with that. One for me has always been reading science fiction literature because that unlocks the imagination. And I think things that unlock the imagination allow you to envision potentials. As a career intel officer, my job was to understand, and think about adversary intentions and impact on operations by, weather, enemy, and terrain. To break it down very, very basically, kind of very, very early days. It certainly moved and much more complex than that. But you have to imagine the future. You have to place yourself in someone else's shoes or some other entity or organization or adversaries' shoes. You view the landscape from their perspective versus your own, your friendly force. That takes imagination. That takes creativity, but that also takes, study. And I think that first unlock the imagination, and whether it's through, reading some science fiction literature, which is entertaining, but gets you to think about things outside of the bounds of today, or whether it's, I wasn't as much watching videos, movies and the like, but I think that also helps do that. For me, the written word was always a more powerful impact personally. But I think also reading science news and understanding what is happening in the state of science today. That's an area that I get to indulge myself on today, that I couldn't, as much as I'm able to do now, previously during my uniform career before I retired. And so that helps me understand kind of what is the state of play of current technologies, and couple that with an active imagination about the future.
What's your favorite book right now?
I've been on a pretty hard sci-fi kick for the last few years. I worked my way through Ian Banks. Ian Banks was a British author. I think he recently passed away. Also a physicist, as I understand it. And he wrote an entire series of books called the Culture series. And it was about a post-need society that had existed in space and had artificial intelligence, ship minds that ran their own ships. He came up with some incredibly creative names for those ships. It's probably an entertaining value there. But thinking about what would society look like when we're post-need, and so what does that mean for man's purpose? What does that mean for AI's purpose? Artificial intelligence, if it actually becomes not generative, but general artificial intelligence, if it can be creative and think beyond the corpus of its body of knowledge, what does that mean for us? What happens when an artificial intelligence can think in 4 or 5 dimensions or more than ways that man cannot? He explores that in his space. And so I found his novels really interesting to think about society from a post-need perspective when AI has eclipsed man, but still coexists with man. And that's a kind of an interesting framework to think about the future.
Love it. I might have to go ahead and pick that up. I do enjoy sci-fi books myself. So
okay, I would not start with Consider Phlebas. That's kind of space tragedy, and you'll finish that book like deeply depressed.
I don't want that. No.
Although that's one of his first. Use of Weapons is another really good one.
Use of Weapons.
All
right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Carl.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure, Scott. Thanks for hosting.
And if you like that video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Also, be sure to check out FutureWerx.com. Stay up to date with all things that are happening with FutureWerx as we explore the future and bring vision to reality. I'm your host, Scott McJunkin, and I will see you next time.